In a word of prayer as we prepare our hearts and minds to learn together. Loving and living God, we are grateful for the grace that it is to be gathered together as a community, for the gift that it is to journey together in this Lenten season as we prepare our hearts, as we prepare our souls for Holy Week, to pause and to continue learning together. We're grateful for this community that we can learn together with and from. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So you may remember that, oh, good, thank you for that, Will. Appreciate that. We are in week 6, the final week of this First in Focus series. And the title of this session is Asking More of the Church This Eastertide. Asking more of the church this Eastertide. And Eastertide, for those that maybe didn't grow up in super liturgical traditions, just means the season after Easter. Similar to Christmas, in the Christian tradition, Easter and Christmas are not just one day a year sort of things. They're whole seasons. They're invitations to a whole season of life. And so as we look to Easter and beyond, how has our study, how has our First in Focus study, how does it prepare us to ask a little bit more of ourselves and of this congregation? So as an idea of where we're going to go, briefly, I just want to give you some of the high points of the First in Focus series that many of you followed at least partially during Lent. I know some of you did 1 or 2 studies, some did all 4. There's no gold stars this morning. I won't ask anybody to raise hands, but I hope it was a fun study. And then I want to introduce my thought partners, people that I've been thinking about probably at least since August or September that have led me to this, the topic for this morning. And then I want to dig deep about what it might look like to ask more of the church in this season of Easter. And then with some closing thoughts about Easter and beyond. So again, to recall First in Focus, the title of the series was Remember Me, Meals, Jesus, and the Calling of the Church. And I did the most scholarly thing that I've probably done at this church, which was to add parentheses to a title. It's very in vogue in the scholarly world. You can create two words that way. So remember, right, is what Tony preached about just now. Cognitively, what do we do when we recall the life and sacrifice of Jesus? But then also re-member. So being put back into the body of Christ was the idea. That meals are this place where we both remember Jesus, but where we are also remembered, where we're also put back into the body of Christ, and we find our identity and our sense of self in a new way. And so I'll say more about what I did with the opening lecture, which was salvation for, not only salvation from. That sort of set the pace for our study. And then in the 4 weeks in between, we looked at meals, first in the Gospel of Luke, then in 1 Corinthians, where if you've ever had an idea that church problems started with the Reformation, 1 Corinthians will fix you of that belief. We've had church problems for as long as there's been a church. And 1 Corinthians is a test case for that. We studied meals in the Gospel of John, which is the only one of our Gospels that doesn't have directly the tradition of the Lord's Supper. It doesn't have the tradition of the Lord's Supper. Instead, what the Gospel of John gives us, as we'll celebrate on Thursday, is the foot washing ceremony, Jesus' washing of his disciples' feet. And then we closed with a little bit of Isaiah, so a little bit of looking back to the prophet Isaiah, but Isaiah's vision is looking forward. And so we did a little bit of the retrospect, the looking backwards and looking forwards at the same time. And then our sermon series, if you've been here for the past 5 weeks, this is no news to you. We studied meals in the Gospel of Luke. So hopefully during our time together during Lent, at the very least, you found yourself hungry at some points because of all of this talk about meals. Maybe you practiced a meal with a good friend or a neighbor. Maybe you're going to, in a new and fresh way, participate in the Maundy Thursday dinners this coming week. But hopefully we've grown to appreciate more of the value and significance of meals. And so my opening lecture, again, if you remember, could be easily captured with these three images, right? One is an artistic rendering of Dante's Inferno. If you've ever read the Divine Comedy, many of our understandings of hell are actually more Dante-infused than Bible-infused, because there's just not as much detail and agonizing suffering in the Bible as there is in Dante. And we have this Get Out of Hell Free card, which I shared 6 weeks ago. I had as a sweatshirt in high school because I was that kind of middle school and high school kid. But that side of the screen reflects this idea of salvation from, that salvation is primarily salvation from eternal damnation, or salvation from the wrath of God, or salvation from some other thing. And that we can affirm that in our Christian tradition, but we also want to have a robust understanding of salvation for. And the image on the other side of the screen of a community of different people being joined together. We're saved to be a part of a community. We're saved to be a part of the church. And so that was the opening lecture. And again, sort of bookending, I want to go a little bit deeper on this idea of salvation from, or salvation for. So, as I said, my thought partners in this have been with me probably since the fall, sometime in the fall. And I want to give you a sense of what they've written, what they've thought about, and how I think it applies to our study and our next steps moving forward. So this is a book that was published probably in August or September, don't quote me on that, of 2023. It's called The Great Dechurching: Who's Leaving, Why They Are Going, and What Will It Take to Bring Them Back, by Jim Davis and Michael Graham. And our leadership team, our ministry team, is going to study this book on Monday mornings in April and May. It's going to be a little book study for us, and we're thinking about reading it as a session in the fall. And I'll say it's a fascinating book. The first half of the book is mostly statistics that are the result of 4,000 interviews that were then sort of divided into even smaller, more qualitative interviews to get at some of these questions about who's leaving, why are people leaving, and what would it take to get people back in the pews. And some of the jaw-dropping figures are that in the last 25 years, their studies suggest that about 40 million people have stopped going to church in the U.S. So that's 15% of the population. And that's where they get this idea of de-churched, right? De-churched is not unchurched. Unchurched are people who have never set foot in a church, maybe grew up in a non-religious household, and never heard the gospel, never really understood Christianity, and they're exposed to it. That's unchurched. De-churched are a whole segment of our population who at one point in their lives were regular members of a church, regular attenders at a church. And I should say, these statistics are all about attendance, and there are other metrics for engagement with a church besides attendance. But the ones that they used for their study were attendance. And so these 40 million people have stopped going to church at all. So their attendance has dropped to 0. So this doesn't even include our Christmas and Easter only folks, right? Which some of you know, our population grows on Christmas and Easter. And then the next Sundays, we're maybe even less than we were the previous Sundays, right? We see these fluctuations. So that group is not even included in this research. And it's written... I will say, sort of, for those that might be interested in this book, it's written from the perspective of evangelicalism, which is, a particular theological tribe that some of us may identify with, some of us may have some hard feelings with, and that's fine. But I just want to name that. They also focus, though, on mainline Presbyterians, Lutherans, etc. in this book. So it's a pretty strong and thought-provoking book. And so one of the things that they point out in this book, they make a distinction between those that they call are casually de-churched and those that they describe as de-churched casualties. All right? The casually de-churched and the de-churched tragedies. Now, my guess is if I asked you to turn to a partner and I said, why do you think most people aren't going to the church? Many of you would probably say things like, oh, the church sex abuse scandals, that's it. People just cannot deal with it. In either the Baptist church, the Catholic church, no way, we're done with church. Or you might have somebody say, there was a theological debate at the church and they just, they threw it in, right? But what the research shows is that the majority of these people who have stopped coming to church, these de-churched people, are casually de-churched. They got out of the habit of going. COVID was huge for this group of people, that after 3 or 4 years of worshiping online, maybe a job change, maybe a move, it was just really hard to get into the habit of going to church, of being a part of a regular faith community. They moved, their kids, participate in the youth industrial sports complex, as Tony likes to describe it. Sunday morning is no longer sacred territory. And so there's sports games, there's ACT and SAT tutoring, there's just the invitation to go to the pool with your neighbors, because that's an easy way to hang out with your kids and get a suntan at the same time, right? So there's no crisis that usually pushes these casually de-churched out of the church. It's not a crisis of faith. It's not a crisis of community. It is just slowly moving away from the rhythm. And then the other group are what these authors call de-churched casualties. And I would say that these are people who are largely hurt by the church. These are people that have experienced some form of religious trauma in their lives. Many of the people that they discuss in the book grew up in the church and as teenagers or young adults experienced a trauma that has propelled them outside of the church. And some of those traumas are around abuse, clergy abuse, around non-reporting of abusers in congregations. It's been around sexism, right? Many churches can struggle with the equal affirmation of the callings of men and women. And as young people grow older, as they go through college and enter adulthood, they say, wait, this doesn't make any sense, that the church is sort of behind the 8 ball in this regard. And some have left the church because of homophobia. That's my description. It's not the description that they use in the book, but are pushed out because of the certain churches' views around human sexuality. The other sort of big one that they talk about de-churched casualties has to do with the politicization of the gospel on both sides of the political spectrums, both on the left and on the right. And you can think about, again, they published this book in 2023. They started their research, I believe, in 2018 or 2019. So imagine what people in the church went through from 2018 to 2023. We've lived through really a very friendly election. We've lived through COVID. We've lived through all of the anxieties about vaccinations and non-vaccinations. You may remember the summer of 2020. We had what many would consider a sort of a reckoning, or at least a national conversation around race and racism that made its way, for better or for worse, into our congregations and pulpits. And so these two types of people who have been de-churched, again, the casually de-churched and the church casualties. Are you with me so far on this distinction? Okay, you've just read half of the book. There you go. Yeah, Dale.
So they did mention racism.
Yes, they did mention racism. Probably a third bullet under de-church casualties. One of the higher. So their research. They had this initial survey, and then they did these follow-up surveys, and they would ask people, why have you stopped going? What were the reasons? So these are self-reported, fill in a bullet, point of why you stopped going. And some of them said, my church is racist, right? Or at least seems to be espouse racist views, and I cannot be a part of it anymore. And so, yeah, that was one of the reasons people walked away. Okay, you're with me. All right. My first introduction to this research was actually an Atlantic article from July of 2023 called "The Misunderstood Reason Why Millions of Americans Stopped Going to Church." If you don't want to read the book and you have access to this article, it's a great summary of the book and distillation of it, as well as sort of an application to it. And I think that Jake Meador, the author, does a really good job of saying, hey, this book helps us define the problem, the major problem with de-churching. And he makes the case, he says the defining or the major reason people are leaving isn't church hurt, and it's not theology, surprisingly. It's not like these people, these 40 million people have all had a sudden enlightenment where they don't believe in God anymore. Or they've experienced suffering so profound that they say, I can no longer believe that God is either good, loving, or sovereign. Right? That's a percentage, but it's a lower percentage. It's not a lack of faith. A number of the people that they interview in this book still read their Bibles. They still pray on a regular basis. They still have what many would consider to be orthodox beliefs. They believe in the Trinity. They believe in salvation through Jesus. They've just disaffiliated with the church. And so Meador's observation is it's actually one of the major causes of this de-churching is just American life, normal American life as it is. The way that our culture has sort of evolved and shifted in the 20th and 21st centuries. And he says one of those is that we now live in a world, and maybe this is true for you or maybe true for your children or your grandchildren, but where we maximize individual accomplishment. We prioritize individual accomplishment or the accomplishment of our children above all else, right? So Jake Meador has this great line about we don't have time for a community like this, because a community like this isn't going to show up on our resume. It's not going to get our kids into college. It's not going to get them into that private school that we're working so hard to get them into. And so how do we do it, right? It's not going to help us get the promotion. Maybe playing golf on Sunday morning instead would, right? With our business partner, our networking, we're rubbing elbows, right? And so this is a shift, and Jake Meador also introduces this concept of workism. And the basic tenet of workism is that our sense of self, our sense of identity comes through what we do. The type of position that we have, the amount of money that we make. Workism is sort of this new religion, Jake Meador says. And if you want a fascinating test case of this, there's a new book, relatively new book, by a woman with the last name of Chen, C-H-E-N, called Pray, Code, Work, or Work, Pray, Code. And it's about the religious lives of Silicon Valley technical workers and how work has become a religion in that context. From a sort of anthropological and sociological perspective, that work is taking the place of what religion has provided in terms of community, in terms of a sense of identity, a sense of purpose. And of course, the authors are concerned about this. Yes. So I believe Meter is. I don't know what tribe Meter comes from. He writes on a blog called Mere Orthodoxy, where he considers the role of Christianity in the public life. So I don't know what brand of Christian he is, but I do believe that he writes from a faith perspective. So here are just a couple of quotations from that Meter article again. He says, first of all, contemporary America simply isn't set up to promote mutuality, care, or common life. Rather, it is designed to maximize individual accomplishment as defined by professional and financial success. Such a system leaves precious little time or energy for forms of community that don't contribute to one's own professional life or as one ages the professional prospects of one's children. And then he goes on to say, but a vibrant, life-giving church requires more, not less time and energy from its members. It asks people to prioritize one another over our career, to prioritize prayer and time reading Scripture over accomplishment. And again, if he's not writing as a Christian, that's a pretty bold assessment of what the church is inviting to do. And so these two quotations, for me, really where I got this idea of asking more. And so when we're talking about asking more, I want to be really clear that asking more is not necessarily or limited to asking more in the sense of to-dos or obligations, right? It would be ironic and probably a little insensitive of me to say to a church, a busy church like First Press, you guys are so busy, here are 15 other things that you can do this Easter season, right? That would be insensitive of me. So I don't want to pitch them as obligations or to-dos. I also don't want to pitch them in a way of like church guilt or shame, right? There's a way for that of this. I think Florida was just looking at me and shaking her finger like that. That's what I don't want to do, right? Is how dare you miss church, right? I'm not sure that we're, as a pastoral team, aiming for 100% attendance. Although, man, that would be pretty cool, right? If we could do that every Sunday. Life happens, and certainly in our theological tradition, I am comfortable with saying, man, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in God's name, God, in Christ's name, there God is also, right? And so that means that we can worship God in a number of ways and in a number of places. But this place, this community on Sunday morning, when we gather for worship and education and fellowship and connection and challenge and all of those things, is such an important part of what we do as a church. And so it's more an invitation than a blah, blah, you should have done better, right? And the other thing I don't think asking more about is asking for more programs. Barry and I have lots of conversations about programs, right? We do not have a lack of programs at this church, believe it or not. If you need evidence of this, we could just look at the back of our bulletins, right, every week. We do a lot at this church. And so I don't think when we say asking more of the church that we're asking more programs. Instead, I think we're asking more in the area of belonging, more in the area of community, and more in the area of fruits of the Spirit. And I'm going to talk about each of these three, drawing on some of that research of the great de-churching and some biblical models for us. And so we've got plenty of time to do these three. So the first is more belonging, asking the church for more belonging. Now, many of you know this about me. I'm not spatially oriented, which means I'll never be an architect like Alan, right? So this is some author's or some artist's rendering of the Temple of Herod in the first century. Is it accurate? Is it archaeologically sound? I have no idea. I could tell you where it's written about in the Bible, and maybe even the Greek words used to describe it, but anything about archaeology, not my strong suit. But for the purpose of illustration, what the arrow is pointing to is what is known as the court of the Gentiles. And so the temple in the first century and the Solomonic temple before it had basically three concentric circles of belonging, right? The very center of center was the Holy of Holies, right? This was where only the high priest went once a year. And outside of that was the holy place. Only priests went in there, right? So it's not like the place where you go and hang out and drink coffee. That's not it. But then on the outside is this place known as the court of the Gentiles. And the authors of the Great De-Churching use this as an analogy to encourage the church to create a more robust forecourt, this place outside of the temple. And so as we think about our life together as a congregation, as a congregation of people committed to following in the way of Jesus, this is creating spaces, as they put it, between belief and unbelief. Creating more spaces for belonging that are in between belief and unbelief. And again, you might think about your own experience of the church. You might think about the people you have coffee with, the people maybe you worship beside at either the 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock service. You may think about the people in your neighborhood that you have faith conversations with. And sort of where are they in this place of belonging, of belief between, or a belonging in between belief and unbelief, right? Many of the people that were surveyed in the Great De-Churching are probably in this in-between space. They're searching. What I talk a lot about with people is they've outgrown the faith of their childhood, right? Just like you put on your jeans in 5th grade that worked great in 4th grade, and all of a sudden, after a summer of growth, they don't fit anymore, right? There are people who their faith, in many ways, their faith of their childhood, maybe the faith before that death, maybe the faith before that layoff, no longer fits. And so they're trying to figure out, what do I believe? What am I still wrestling with? And so I think the church, asking more of the church to create these spaces of belonging is really, really important. And I've always been fascinated with the doubting Thomas figure from the Gospel of John, right? And I'm going to put this text up on the screen for you. This happens at the end of the Gospel of John. You probably know this story by heart. Jesus appears to all of the disciples but Thomas, right? Who knows what Thomas was doing? He could have been out getting water. He could have been asleep. We don't know. But Thomas wasn't there. And so he learns, oh, these people have seen the risen Lord. And Thomas says this famous line, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe, right? Unless I get some tangible proof of this resurrection, I'm not going to believe. And then this is probably the most understated phrase in this whole story. A week later, his disciples were again in the house and Thomas was with them. And I think about how long this week must have been. 11 disciples have seen the risen Lord. They're jazzed out of their minds. And Thomas is like, I just don't see it. I don't get it. I think you're all crazy. I read some pop psychology that said in grief, sometimes we imagine we see people who are not alive. You guys are just collectively deluded. But one of the miracles of Easter is that Thomas gets to be there with them for the whole week. Thomas doesn't walk away, and the disciples don't say, hey, Thomas, we've had 2 days of your questions. If on day 3 you're still asking questions, you got to go. Day 5, get out. We have no space for you. We've seen the risen Lord. What's your deal? Get on the bus. Get on board. No, they sit with Thomas. And I've always loved this week with Thomas as an analogy and a metaphor of creating these spaces of belonging. How long can the week be in the lives of our friends who are wrestling with these questions? And do we create a space in our lives, at our tables, in our Sunday school classes, in our worship spaces that allows the Thomases of our lives to feel welcome and included, even if they're like, I'm still not so sure. I'm just not so sure. I'm glad you're sure. I'm just not on board. And so I think that this story of Thomas and this week, can be extended to months and years for some of our friends, some of our family members, some of our neighbors that need this space of belonging. And so can we be that kind of church that lives into that sense of belonging? So more belonging. The second is more community, specifically a community that counts and costs. And what I mean by a community that counts, and again, I'm drawing on the work of the great de-churching here. They have a pretty broad discussion of relationships and relationships that sort of move beyond a surface level understanding, move beyond how's the weather, how's your tennis game, pickleball, big pickleball season in our culture right now. But a community, as they say, that is intimate, gracious, and patient enough and deep enough. And so intimate, patient, and deep, right? These are the sorts of relationships that I would pray we would be living into in this Eastertide season. So they're intimate, they're going beyond surface level, they're gracious and patient enough. They're able to sort of sit with us, sometimes when we're in our worst, sometimes when we're in our struggles, sometimes when we're deep in our feelings, right? And they can sit with us. And then they're also deep enough to ask the hard questions, deep enough to go beyond the appearance, deep enough to go beyond what's right in front of us. And so again, I would summarize a community that counts as people who are you going to call from the emergency room? Right? Who are you going to call when your car breaks down on I-75 and the tow truck is an hour and a half away, right? Who are you going to call after you've had that really, really hard conversation with your children, one of your children? So these are deeper levels of commitment and connection. But they also have certain costs. And again, I want to go to that Jake Meter quotation that I shared earlier. There is a cost for continuing to remain committed to this congregation, to continue to be a part of the church. This isn't in the book, The Great De-Churching, but I would just say one of the places that we're at as a society is that the social benefits or the perceived social benefits of being a church member are just not as strong as they were in previous generations, right? If you wanted to get into the country club, if you wanted to get the job, if you wanted to have your daughter marry the right person, right? Being a part of a church really mattered. Now, it doesn't. The cultural capital has decreased for a number of reasons. And so I want to say that being here and being in a midweek Bible study or being a part of a small group or a men's group or a women's group, there are costs there. You could check more emails, right? You could read more. You might work on that business proposal. You might do X, Y, or Z. There are costs to being a part of this community. And I think a lovely picture of this comes from Acts chapter 2, one of the famous pictures of the early church. So it says, awe came over everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Certainly, there's probably an element of Luke's idealism in this description, but at the root, it captures this early church was willing to invest their lives in this community, literally their livelihood in this ministry. So the sharing of possessions, the breaking bread together, the spending time together in prayer and in study, this would have had very real world consequences in the first century. This would have caught the attention of their Jewish and their non-Jewish neighbors. People would have noticed that this would have happened. And so, but this is the sort of robust and growing and vibrant community, I think, that Jake Meador is talking about when he talks about asking more of the church. And finally, more fruits of the Spirit. I don't know if in heaven God will tell us that kindness is more like a pear than an apple. But this image suggests that kindness is an apple, goodness is a Granny Smith apple, faithfulness is some brownish apple. Anyways, these are the fruits of the Spirit. And many of you know the fruits of the Spirit. You probably sang them at Vacation Bible School in your past. These are described in Galatians 5. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And when I'm thinking about asking more of the church this Eastertide, and when I'm thinking about more of the gifts of the Spirit, more of the fruits of the Spirit, I'm engaging a major theme in this book, The Great Dechurching, which was the number of people, respondents, who said they were turned off by people who failed to display the fruits of the Spirit. That's my paraphrase. They talk a lot about children whose parents have not helped them with the handoff in their faith. And it had to do with things like the respondents would say, what could your parents have done better? And many of us are parents in this room. Not all of us, but many of us are parents in this room. And the respondents said they could have listened better. They could have lived their faith. And they could have been more charitable to those with whom they disagreed. Man, and all of a sudden, you don't have to have children. That can be an indictment on all of us. What if we listened better? What if we lived our faith, right? And what if we were more charitable with those with whom we disagreed? What kind of reputation would that give the church? What kind of landing zone would that give the church? And then it's in a similar space. They talk about what will it take to win the trust of those who have been wounded, right? Who have been wounded by the church, injured by the church. And the respondents said, be humble, listen actively, be calm, and be curious, right? And so as we think about asking more of the church, this book, this research suggests that listening, empathy, humility, and curiosity go a long, long way. A long, long way with people who, again, may be in that long week of Thomas's doubt. And we can help them. We can accompany them. We can walk alongside of them. And so here are just a few closing thoughts for Easter and beyond. The book, The Great Dechurching, uses this language of on-ramps. So on-ramps and off-ramps. How did you get off of the church byway, right? And how do you get back onto it is the metaphor that they're going with. From that, these are not their on-ramps. These are sort of my own thoughts and distillations of them. But I think that these are wonderful for us to consider as we move into the Easter season, as we move into the miracle of the empty tomb, which is a sign and a seal that God is in fact making all things new. We can be hopeful. We should be hopeful about what God is doing in this world. And so the first one is just the power of invitation. For those people that have been casually de-churched, We talked about this at session on Tuesday night. For those that have been casually de-churched, we shouldn't underestimate how significant an invitation can be. Simply an invitation to say, hey, Bill, would you come to church with me this morning? Some of us are going to work on April the 16th, Barry? For the men's service day? April 13th. Some of us are going to a men's service day on April the 13th. Would you come with us and have lunch afterwards? I'm a part of this weird parents group where we kind of talk about our kids and we also drink wine. Would you like to be a part of that? Right? The power of invitation. It makes some people's skin crawl, but sometimes that's all it is these people have gotten out of the habit. They are searching for community. They are searching for a spirituality that fits where they are. And maybe it's just that invitation. Hey, want to come to Easter? Want to come to a Maundy, Thursday dinner? I hear there's going to be a pastor there. We're going to have communion, right? So the power of invitation. The second is the power of listening. We live in a bumper sticker society, right? We live in a bumper sticker society. Apparently, we can get all of our beliefs about God and politics on a bumper sticker. And my bumper sticker is better than your bumper sticker. And I think that this Easter season and this book and this research suggests we need to be about the business of listening instead of stamping our bumper stickers on other people. We live in a contentious society that is so interested in winning an argument instead of listening to where somebody is. And so if we can just shift that momentum, if we can just shift the ability to hear people, to ask questions, why? That's interesting. How's that working for you? Or where did you hear that? What makes you believe that? What in your experience has led you to that conclusion can be such a way to engage and perhaps bring down the heat of a conversation. So can we listen to people? And then the final is just the power of belonging. One of the things that I've heard Tony say repeatedly at the new members' classes is when he says, First Press of Atlanta is a better place because you are here. First Press is a better place because of your presence here. We are more the community God intends us to be because you're saying yes to membership here. And I think that is such a powerful illustration of belonging. That when we look at people in the pews, when we look at people at coffee hour, when we think about people in our Bible studies, to say and to really genuinely mean it, not as a sales pitch, but to genuinely mean it, we are so much better because you are here. We are so much better because we've got a Thomas in here. We're so much better because we've got a Peter who was all in and then betrayed Jesus, right? We're better with you here. We're more like the community that Christ has intended us to be because you're here. And I think if we could capture that in how we sit in the sanctuary, in how we shake hands at welcome, in how we embrace loud and sometimes disruptive children, that would be a miracle, right? To say, we are a better place because you're here. You're here, and you're here, and you're here. We're better because of it. I just think that is really a powerful way forward in our time, and it could be part of how we invite people into our life of faith. So it's 10:45, which means I've ended just on time, perfectly on time. I don't need any sort of standing ovation for ending on time. But we do have some time for questions or sort of thoughts from you all. Yeah, Margaret.
I think what you're saying is so powerful because I know in my women's Bible study on Wednesday mornings, we talk a lot about our concern about our
I'll repeat it.
Oh, I'm sorry. We talk a lot about our concern about our adult children who are not as active as we are. And thank you. I especially think that listening to our grandchildren is so important because we can be models of just listening to them, and especially if they want to move into something that's maybe more serious or whatever. But gosh, Chris, this was really good. Thank you. Really good.
Thanks.
You were talking about community. I like a slash to that and put family.
Yeah.
I mean, this is family to me.
Yeah.
I mean, I have two brothers that are still living 1,000 miles away. We're close, but this is my family.
Yeah.
And I like that, community / family kind
Yeah.
of thing.
That's great. That's actually, Dale, that's a great reminder because Paul's letters, 1 Peter, so many of the early Christian texts talk about the Christian community as siblings, as family. Sociologists would call it fictive kinship arrangements. But the reason why the early church had to create fake families was because sometimes they were not welcome in their family of origin. And I do think that's part of what the church can be, is a place of belonging for those that maybe don't have that by choice or not by choice. And so, yeah, we are a family. We are the body of Christ, but we are also a crazy, lovely, sometimes dysfunctional family, like everybody else's family. That's a great reminder, Dale. Awesome. Yeah.
Would you make sure that there is access to these remarks through the website? I don't know if you've recorded it, but at least to be able to put this up, I think the message is so important for all of us, and particularly those who were not able to hear it this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Ellen Adair. Yeah, assuming that the technology fairies were on our side this morning, it was supposed to be live streamed and therefore recorded. I should also give Ellen Adair kudos for calling my attention to this book as well. She shared an NPR article with the two authors that it's like 45 minutes, and it goes sort of into the implications of their research as well. But yeah, and also Mary Ellen isn't here. Mary Ellen Vian, I should say publicly, she helped with the thinking through of the meals theme. She sent me an article. Of course, if you know Mary Ellen, she sent me a couple of academic articles and said, I really think we should think about this during Lent. And I said, this is interesting. Let's think about this during Lent. And so she helped, along with Barry, in mapping out the First in Focus series. So many thanks to them as well. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. This was great. We, several of us have been planning the 24-25 year for Faith and Life Sunday school class. And if we could just have these slides, you don't have to post them. I'll ask you for them afterward. But this is exactly the theme that we're considering, and that is rebuilding community. Yeah. Because there's a strong undercurrent in our thinking that it was destroyed in many cases by that thing that happened in 2020.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and if you know the book Bowling Alone, COVID only exacerbated some larger cultural trends for sure. Well, great. I will send those. I can share those slides. And thanks everyone again for being here. It cost you something, and I appreciate it. So blessings to you as we enter into Holy Week, and we'll see you all either at worship or some other time this week. Thanks everyone.